All right, everyone, this last presentation will wrap up Chapter 3. We're going to talk briefly about how we store nutrients in our bodies, and then we're going to talk about our microbiota, the microorganisms that we store in our large intestine, and how those can be helpful. So nutrient storage capabilities, this is 3.10 in your text. We talked about how we break down our food, how we digest our food and absorb the nutrients from our food. And now I want to talk to you just very briefly about how these nutrients are stored. So we eat pretty frequently, we humans do. If we don't get food within a couple weeks or maybe even less, we will die. So we need to eat very frequently. We can store many of our nutrients, some for shorter periods of time, some for longer periods of time. And this storage capacity will vary for each nutrient. We know that we store fat in adipose tissue. We store glucose and glycogen in our muscle and liver. So these are our carbohydrates, glucose and glycogen. We break them down for energy as we do fat and protein. And these carbohydrates are stored in the muscle and liver. We have floating around in our blood a very small reserve of glucose and amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of our proteins. And then when we talk about vitamins and minerals during the last 2 weeks of the semester, we'll talk about how those are stored, but it's so varied that it doesn't make sense to go into it now. There is a picture I provided you and that your book provided you with that shows a skeleton. We know we have a lot of calcium in our bones. A balanced diet is the safest means to acquire nutrients needed for optimal health. We talked about how if you're taking supplements, you do have to be careful about reaching that upper limit, the UL for some of our vitamins and minerals. And yes, we can store a lot of our nutrients, but it's really important to be taking them in the form of food every day. Let's switch gears and talk about the human microbiota. So what is microbiota? As you can imagine, micro, small, biota, living things. When we think about the microorganisms that live on and in our body, we don't necessarily think about our GI tract, but we do have healthy bacteria that live in our intestines, especially our large intestines, that have been known. There's lots of research being done on this. There's still a lot that we don't know, but we do know that some of these microorganisms can be very helpful for our immunity and for just for our overall health. So let's talk about that. I'm showing you some foods here that are either prebiotics or probiotics or both, and we'll talk about what those terms mean. Okay, so what are probiotics? Probiotics are foods and supplements with living microorganisms. So healthy bacteria, healthy yeast, for example, that can change the conditions of bacterial colonies in the large intestines. So we'll go into the benefits a little bit more in the carbohydrate unit, but I just want to talk about it here because it's so interesting. So most of the bacteria that we eat is destroyed before it reaches the large intestine, but some live. Some are able to withstand the conditions in our stomach and live. And some of these bacteria are very healthy for us. So humans have been preparing food with microorganisms for thousands of years. If you think about beer and wine, these drinks are fermented, and the product of fermentation in these cases is alcohol. So what is fermentation? Fermentation is a process where sugars are transformed into a new product through chemical reactions carried out by microorganisms. And as I said, this product is alcohol in beer and wine. In foods like yogurt, the product is lactic acid. So yogurt is made from milk. Healthy bacteria colonies added to milk will ferment the lactose and change it into lactic acid, which gives yogurt its tart flavor. And so yogurt, let me get my pointer out here. Yogurt is a probiotic. It contains bacteria that can withstand the contents of our stomach and make it into the large intestine and have positive effects in the large intestine and for our overall health. This is a picture of a kefir. And kefir is made in a similar way to yogurt. It's a fermented milk drink made from kefir grains, and these grains aren't really grains as we think of them. They are a specific mix of bacteria and yeast that ferment the milk. Here, let's see, right here I'm showing you kombucha. And kombucha is made from adding a yeast to black tea. So it's basically fermented tea. And again, this is a probiotic. This has healthy bacteria in it. You'll see sometimes people try to brew their own kombucha or sell it. And there have been cases of food poisoning. You can brew your own kombucha, but you really need to know what you're doing. And that's the case for making your own sauerkraut too. You can ferment your own sauerkraut. Here I'm showing my favorite sauerkraut. This is Bubby's. So sometimes sauerkraut is made by pouring vinegar over cabbage, and sometimes it is made by fermenting the cabbage, which is basically pressing it and putting salt over it and letting it sit for about a month where it kind of just stews in its own juices, and sometimes unhealthy bacteria can grow, but the idea is that the healthy bacteria take over, and eventually you have this fermented product that has lots of great probiotics, lots of great healthy microorganisms. I have never made my own sauerkraut. I've wanted to, but I usually just buy it at the store. Let's see. So I've talked about everything I think I've talked about all these pictures. So the known benefits of probiotics is that once we have this microflora in our gut, this healthy bacteria in our gut, and so once they're established in our large intestines, it can prevent the growth of unhealthy bacteria, and it can enhance the immune function of our large intestine and our body in general. Like I said, there's still a lot of research being done on probiotics. For things like sourdough bread, the dough has a lot of very healthy microorganisms in it, and that would be considered a probiotic. But once you bake the dough, all of these microorganisms die, and so when you eat bread, that's not considered a probiotic. Okay, let's move along here. So what are prebiotics? So probiotics contain living organisms in them. They contain microorganisms, these bacteria or yeast. Prebiotics do not contain microorganisms. They don't contain any living microorganisms in them. They are fiber in our diet and complex proteins that are not digested by the intestine, but fermented by bacteria in the large intestine. So bacteria in our large intestine can ferment some of the soluble fiber. Remember, fiber we cannot digest. We don't have the enzymes to digest fiber, but some bacteria can. And so this fiber passes through our large intestine, and these healthy bacteria in our large intestine can ferment them and produce these little fatty acids, which is a type of fat that can provide energy to the healthy bacteria to grow and flourish in the GI tract. So like legumes, oatmeal, the flesh of apples, citrus fruits, all of these foods have soluble fiber that can act as a prebiotic. So it's really the prebiotics that help grow the microflora of the intestine. So we need prebiotics to keep, if we're eating probiotics, if we're eating these microorganisms, we want them to be established in our large intestines, we need to eat prebiotics to basically feed them. So the idea would be to include both in your diet. And if you are put on an antibiotic, if you have an infection and need an antibiotic, well, that can kill a lot of these healthy bacteria along with the dangerous bacteria. So it's a good idea to be eating a lot of these pre and probiotics to help reestablish the bacteria in the gut. This is a really exciting area of research. We're learning so much about probiotics and about these healthy bacteria in our gut. I did want to show one more slide. I saw this news article last January. So, pill derived from human feces treats recurrent gut infections. You heard me right. There are basically poop pills that are, I think they were approved to be put on the market in April. So the idea is there is one type of very unhealthy bacteria that can cause diarrhea. It can be very harmful, especially in older people or younger people, and can result in death. And one of the best ways to kill the bad bacteria that causes this infection is with good bacteria. And so doctors were doing fecal transplants. Basically, they were taking healthy feces or feces from healthy people and transplanting them, transplanting them in the colon of the unhealthy people. So usually during a colonoscopy. So this is pretty invasive, and doctors figured out how to take the feces from healthy people and package it in a pill and give this to the people that had the unhealthy bacteria in their gut. And like I said, it was approved by the FDA. I think it was just in April. So that's an example of one way you can get some of these healthy bacteria in your gut if you really need it. And again, we'll talk about this more when we talk about carbohydrates.